Brendan, let's start with Michigan State. I want to get your thoughts on a bunch of teams, but MSU kind of wildly inconsistent here. They did start the season really well, but it just does seem like it's gone a bit south here. What do you think's going on with the Spartans? I know you saw them in person last week. What's your takeaway of what you've seen?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of missed shots of late, for sure. And it's missed shots kind of compounded by some of the styles of teams they're playing, that it's just been kind of a mess, frankly. And when you look at where Michigan State is, there's been this early on, it seemed like all the pieces kind of fit and everyone knew their role and everything kind of made sense. And then gradually that's kind of come undone. And suddenly we're talking about, should they be playing the 2-point guard lineup more? And what can you do to find a way to spark Max Christie and Gabe Brown? And, Malik Hall is arguably their best player sometimes. And then other games you're kind of waiting for him to get going. What should the minutes split be with him and Joey Hauser? So it went from a team that had a lot of answers early to a lot of questions late, which is very much a flip of the formula when you consider Tom Izzo's teams and how these things usually go. So the good news is, for an offense that is desperate to find a rhythm and find some made shots, well, they're about to play 3 bottom half teams in the league in terms of defense. Obviously on paper, Purdue and Michigan, I was including Iowa in that as a team with one of the bottom half defenses. But you get Purdue, you get Michigan. These are 2 teams that haven't really been known for defense this year. So if you can find something resembling an offensive identity in these 2 games, maybe it's something to build on. But I'm not sure how this goes these next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I worry about the other end of the court too. I mean, you look at this 6-game stretch, and they're solidly in the bottom half of the nation in opponents' 2-point field goal percentage. They just are not as tough inside. Offensive and defensive rebounding percentage in that stretch, bottom half of the nation. I mean, they've kind of been outworked on the glass. If you could just put your finger on one thing, I think it would be easier. But kind of to your point, it just feels like there's so many different things going on here that are uncharacteristic of what we expect from a Tom Izzo team.
Well, and look at it this way. If we were going to sit here and make an all-league team right now, who from Michigan State is there? Going down to the 3rd team. I don't think they have a player who would be 1st, 2nd, or 3rd team all-league right now, which is pretty insane to think for a program like Michigan State. But that speaks to the big issue, right? Like, there's a lot of high-end talent in this league this year. I mean, we can talk about 5 guys who have a potential claim for Conference Player of the Year, let alone 1st team all league. And then you have Michigan State, where who's Michigan State's best player? Sometimes it depends on the day, and sometimes it doesn't seem like they have one, period. So, you want to talk about what's the core issue? Talent, frankly.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound the alarm bells here because, again, he is the model of consistency. But now this is the 2nd straight year. They were a first 4 team last year. They're probably going to make the tournament this year. I mean, they would really need to collapse here down the stretch not to, but they're certainly not going to be particularly highly seeded. Is this just a normal ebb and flow? I mean, Duke did make the tournament last year, right? Like, this happens even to elite programs. Is that just what's going on here? Is there something deeper in your mind?
Well, I mean, there's always underlying issues and reasons that these kind of peaks and valleys occur. The question is always, for any program, is what do you learn from it? So, what is Michigan State going to identify in recent recruiting that speaks to why the product is what it is right now? A lot of people like to point to that 2018 recruiting class, and they're not wrong, frankly. That was a major class, a big class that ended up being Foster Lawyer and Thomas Kithier and Gabe Brown and Marcus Bingham, and I'm probably forgetting one, whatever. But it was supposed to be kind of a transformative class, and it wasn't. And that was the group that was supposed to come after Cassius Winston and Xavier Tillman. It just hasn't happened these last 2 years. So, there's been some recruiting misses, and I'm sure there's some stylistic questions that if you really want to get into, we can get into about the offense and just kind of the way Michigan State plays and the recipe that is used there that has really been successful. But at the end of the day, it's your players. So, Michigan State has to figure out how to get its talent back to being in the top, 3 in the league.
Let's dive into Michigan a little bit. We were talking during the break about your history with Phil Martelli. Your dad was the track coach at St. Joe's. You've known Phil Martelli essentially forever. This felt like vintage Phil Martelli. I've just known him from afar. I certainly don't know him in any way close to the way you know him, or Andy Katz was in here last night. He knows him quite well too. But as someone who loves and is passionate about college basketball and has admired the work that he did at St. Joe's, this just kind of seemed like who he was, right? Who he is. He's a steadying presence, and that was what they needed last night, an even-handed approach, and they got it.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing with Phil right now is the stage of his life, the stage of his career, I think, is there is a great degree of self-awareness of his place. This is not a potential, future Michigan head coach, right? I mean,
right.
like Phil's in the latter days of his career. So what does he do after the game? He turns the attention to Sadi Washington and Howard Isley and says those are 2 future head coaches. So, it's not only a steadying presence in terms of the leadership and in terms of the messaging, but it's also optics-wise kind of understanding what this chance is for him to, help promote other coaches and realize that, like, look, everyone knows Phil Martelli's Phil Martelli. He's been doing it a long time, and there isn't much more he can do to, promote himself. He is his own brand. So it was funny though, the press conference after the game. It was very much, Phil being Phil and kind of a lot of good lines that you could see. I was in the back of the room for the press conference and saying a couple things, and you could just see the writers in the room, man. Oh, this is great! This is great stuff. They're writing down everything he says. They're hanging on every word. And it reminded me of some old days back when he was quite the media darling at times at St. Joe's.
Yes, and those who have been around him and been following him for a long time, as you have, just say, hey, this is just another day, right? With Phil Martelli, this is who he is. You wrote a really interesting piece, I thought, on Juwan Howard this week, and I wanted to dig into that a little bit, essentially saying, hey, this could go one of 2 ways here. How big a challenge is it for Juwan Howard to bounce back from this? I mean, that moment is forever going to be etched in people's minds. There's just nothing that you can do about it. What's done is done. So how tough is it now, knowing that people are going to think about that when they think about Juwan, for him to get back to the way that he is thought of as a rising star in the coaching ranks and someone who can put together a program and compete for a national title?
I mean, that's up to Juwan. I think this can be a defining moment in a bad way or a good way. The notion of, it being something that he can't get beyond, I don't see that. I think that there's a chance for introspection. There's a chance for self-examination. Whatever it was that led to that level of reaction, right? Because Michigan, I've said this a couple times in conversations like this, like this whole idea for competitors only is this thing that Juwan Howard has pounded since he got the job at Michigan. And that's great to a degree. And he wants his guys at a certain level of competitiveness, and he wants his guys, ready to run through a wall and things like that. And that's been the goal of the identity of that program since he got that job. But there's a cap. And for the head coach, there's especially a cap. And he went too far. And he has to figure out why that happened and take some accountability. And I have no doubt that he will. But what does it look like on the other side? That's the question, and we don't know. because there could be any number of reasons that a moment like that happens. And where does he go from here? I'm as curious as anybody else to find out, because that can be something that sticks to him for the rest of his life, or it can be something that he gets to point to years from now and say, man, that was something where I learned a lot about myself, and it changed me for the better. We'll see.
Yeah, no, I think all of us, right, you want to be remembered for your best moments and not your worst moments, and that becomes the challenge, especially when your worst moments are as public as that one was. So we shall see. Hey, you saw Illinois in person last week. I want to ask you a little bit about them. They are one of the teams, certainly in the Big Ten, that is being talked about as a potential Final Four or even national championship team. What stood out to you as you watched the Illini?
Well, it's always good to see Illinois in person, just to have a reminder of Kofi Coburn's presence inside. It just never ceases to amaze me. That was my first time seeing them in person this year, and I can't remember if I saw them in person last year because of the circumstances, but it's something to behold. But anyway, we all know that. That performance going into Michigan State, I thought was a great response to being called out the way that they were by Brad Underwood, and it did seem like a kind of line in the sand almost coming off of that loss at Rutgers, and Rutgers feeling like it outplayed out tough Illinois. Brad Underwood was not having that. He drew that line, and it was very much a March is coming, man. And if you're going to be ready for it, you got to be at a certain level day in and day out. And he called him out. They answered the call, going in, winning at Breslin. First time Brad Underwood won in East Lansing. That's good momentum, and they've got some time here to I think build and improve on it. I thought it was really interesting though, seeing Curbelo get late minutes in that game down the stretch. His role still isn't remotely close to what any of us thought it was going to be back in the preseason, but little by little, he's playing more and more minutes that matter. So, I'm most curious to see in these next 2 weeks, how much does he kind of get back into a larger role? And because that's still one of the big questions, like, does the integration of Curbelo, is that something that raises the ceiling for Illinois? Or is it something that could potentially, knock a few things off kilter? Because they clearly got it going. 12-4 in the league with the way it's been. What happens if you're adding more of it?
That's what's fascinating, I think, about this team, is that they've been as good as they have been, despite the fact that they haven't had the team on the floor they've expected to have for much of the year. Mm-hmm. So, huge game tonight coming up against Ohio State. We're going to preview that in a moment. Brendan Quinn, really appreciate your time and your insights. Thanks so much. Indiana in what feels like a must-win situation as they host Maryland. The Hoosiers are squarely on the tourney bubble. That's a battle at the top of the conference. Illinois hosting Ohio State. Hinted at that one with Brendan. Of course, a rematch of last year's Big Ten championship game won by the Illini. Let's start there as I'm rejoined by Rafael, and I know you have your eye for Ohio State on Malachi Branham.
Yeah, Malachi Branham, I believe, is the freshman of the year in the conference. He's been making his claim. Think about the last 7 games. He's raised his points per game from 11 to 16 in these last stretch. And then the last 2 games, he's just been unbelievable, averaging 24.5, 6.5 rebounds, but shooting the ball close to 70% from the field in the last 2 games. And he's only taken 4 3-pointers in the last 2 games. I love his ability to score in the mid-range, to get to the free throw line. 8 for 8 from the free throw line in their last game. He really took that game over. I love how Ohio State deferred to him. You see Jamari Wheeler bring the ball up, point at Malachi Branham, say, come get it. And that's the type of point guard that you need on your team, a veteran that knows who's feeling it, knows who should have the ball. And I love that he was able to go get his own. But when he saw the defense collapse in that last very play against Indiana, got the ball to E.J. Liddell for a dunk. So he has the ability to score the ball, but when he's doubled or tripled, he can find open guys to get them shots. But if he's going to play that way and lead this team from the perimeter, along with E.J. Liddell, who's an All-American, this team can have a special March.
One of the things I think is really interesting in this game is the big man matchup, because they are so different. E.J. Liddell is someone who pulls you outside, takes you out beyond the three-point arc. In some ways, reminds me a little bit, they're different games because E.J. Liddell's more physical inside, but some of the things he can do are somewhat reminiscent of Pete Nance.
Yeah.
And when Northwestern has played Illinois twice, they have not guarded Pete Nance with Kofi Coburn, right? They have instead guarded him with a different player. They've had a couple different guys who have been on him. Do you expect a similar approach from Illinois? You don't expect them to try to put Kofi on Liddell, do you?
No, I don't think so. I think you have to put Kofi on Zed Key or Kyle Young coming in off the bench and have those guys stay off of the glass in that manner. But that's the matchup I'm looking forward to most. Do you put DeMonte Williams on E.J. Liddell, or do you go with Jacob Grandison? I think if you go with either or, E.J. Liddell is a smart enough player to get to the block, to get to that mid post, get to the block, punish them on the inside. So Illinois is going to have to flip that matchup. You're going to have to see Jacob Grandison, if E.J. Liddell's guarding him, maybe run off some screens to get E.J. Liddell moving at a pace that he's not necessarily used to on the defensive end. But he could have a field day in the post against those guards. Illinois plays 4 guards at times. They switch a lot. So if you get the wrong matchup, maybe Trent Frazier on an E.J. Liddell in the post, that could bring trouble to Illinois. But I like that they could go down on the other end, switch the matchup, go attack that matchup as well. But E.J. Liddell could be a problem.
And when Illinois is on the offensive end, they have not shot the ball all that well lately. Jacob Grandison was great against Michigan State, and the combination of Grandison and Coburn probably won them the game. But it feels like, for whatever reason, we talked at the beginning of this year about their guards and how many different guys could beat you from the perimeter. Plummer was unbelievable at the beginning of the year. He's fallen off a little bit, although he certainly had his moments. Trent Frazier's had some huge moments for them. But again, the level of consistency hasn't quite been there. How big an issue do you see that being for Illinois coming down the stretch here?
I see it as a true issue because it seems as though they either go to Kofi, get a 2-point, or it's a kick out, catch and shoot 3. I really strongly believe that those guards have to play off of closeouts a little bit more. You see Kofi's getting double or triple team. He makes that cross-court pass. If you're open, shoot it. But if you have someone flying at you on a closeout, go around them. Maybe it's not for you to score the basketball. You get 2 feet in the paint, the defense collapses even more. You get a kick out 3. It's a higher percentage shot for those shooters. They can step right there in rhythm and make that shot. But I think they have to drive the basketball. Trent Frazier is too fast with the basketball. He can get into the paint at any time he wants to. So I think if they can have guards driving the ball, Grandison, Williams getting back involved, they can find each other more shots without having to go to the post first.
Buckeyes have won 3 of their last 4 trips to Champaign. Should be a really good game tonight, an important one at the very top of the Big Ten standings. There's an important one in the middle of the Big Ten standings as well, involving Indiana. We were talking last night, you and Andy Katz and I stopped short of calling anything a must-win just because you always have to think, well, there's a Big Ten tournament that comes after it.
Yep.
But this is as close as you can get, to me, to a must-win for Indiana. I think if you drop this one, you probably can't lose to Minnesota this weekend either. I mean, you are so tenuous right now. Mike DeCourcy has them out of the NCAA tournament. This is a game you can ill afford to lose. Can you make up for it if you sweep Purdue or something like that? Maybe, but it would be a really bad idea to lose this game tonight.
Yeah, they competed hard against Ohio State, who's at the top of the conference. But you've got to win the games you're supposed to win. And this is no disrespect to Maryland, but Indiana is making a tournament push. They should win this game. They have the players to do it, but it's all about the discipline and the approach they take to it. Indiana's guards have not been playing well the last 4 games. Look at the combination of Parker Stewart, Xavier Johnson, Miller Kopp. They are 28 of their last 96 shots from the field. And then you look at Xavier Johnson specifically, he's averaging 10 points, 4 assists, but he's had 17 turnovers in the last 4 games. He's shooting the ball 28% and just 3 for 14 from 3. So there's got to be something that changes between that guard mix-up. Maybe it's less shots, more assists, or maybe just get the ball inside. You have 2 horses in TJD and Race Thompson. Play through those guys, especially down the stretch. If this is a close game, TJD cannot get 2 or 3 shots in the last final minutes, and that's what he's been getting the last 2 games in close games. They've got to figure out their half-court offense and move. They sometimes Indiana gets the ball on the perimeter, and this was me once. Put the ball above your head, try to make a post feed. If it's not there, you maybe take a bad one. But move without the basketball, throw the ball inside, cut off the post. They've got to get a little bit more movement. It's become stagnant. It's a little easy to guard.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch kind of the guard play and the matter in which it's been up and down, and then think about how different it might have been here over these last few weeks if they would have had Rob Finney. I mean, you can't help but to look back at that game against Purdue that he won. I mean, he won them the game, and that's kind of what they've been expecting from him throughout his career. And then Trey Galloway was injured last time out as well, so they haven't really had all of their pieces here to fire on all cylinders. But, man, 5 straight losses. And now they get a Maryland team that's playing pretty well. I mean, 2 straight wins. Fats Russell's been great.
Yeah, Fats Russell's, his last 4 games, 21 points a game, 6 rebounds. It's one of the smallest guys on the floor, getting you 4 assists. He's been extremely confident and extremely aggressive. He's become the fastest guard in the league. He is probably the fastest guard in the league. He can get to the basket at will. He's starting to make his jump shots. His team is giving him the basketball and getting out of the way, trusting that he's going to make the right decision, whether it's for himself or for another teammate. But he's been playing extremely well. If you can get him and Eric Ayala playing well again together tonight, Indiana could be in for a long one, because sometimes the Indiana guards take those matchups a little personal. So if you see Fats Russell scoring the basketball, you may see Xavier Johnson wanting to attack him on the other end, and they can't fall into that. You know Fats is going to play his game. Eric Ayala can score the basketball, but Indiana has to stay with Indiana's game plan. And I think that's where they're missing Rob Finney, that calming veteran leader on the floor. He's been there before. He kind of can merge those transfer guys in with the guys that's already been there. He seems to be the one that fits in both groups, if that makes sense. So I think they're really missing his leadership out there on the floor. And sometimes if a guy, he doesn't have a game like Purdue every game, but he's just that calming factor. He comes in the game, he gets the ball where it's supposed to be, and now Xavier Johnson knows I'm not coming off the floor. So he can kind of play whichever way he wants to, but they're definitely missing Rob Finney.
Naismith Coach of the Year late season watch list released this past week. 2 Big Ten coaches among the final 15 up for the award. They're Wisconsin's Greg Gard and Illinois' Brad Underwood. The winner will be announced on April the 3rd. I want to talk through with you, Rafael, some of the top coaching performances in the Big Ten this year. Let's start with the 2 guys on that list. What stands out to you about Greg Gard?
The ability to keep his system the same and just grow his players within that system. We know Johnny Davis has been unbelievable this year, so the confidence he's gave to him to go out and play his game, he's even tweaked it a little bit. Wisconsin's playing a little bit faster than they normally do.
Yeah.
But you think about a guy like Stephen Crow, had 8 points an entire season last year.
That's amazing, right?
In the season, not a game, in the season. He had 20 and 7 last night on the road at the Barn. He was their guy. He was their go-to. So the ability to grow your players into their roles and have them succeed in those roles, that's just beautiful to me. But also, he was picked bottom of the Big Ten this season by the media. But so I think to be able to bounce back from that, not fall into that trap, have his guys go out there, they see the rankings as well, but understand that if we play Wisconsin-style basketball, we'll be just fine. Now they're first in the Big Ten race. They have a win over Purdue. They win close games. I think he does a great job. And winning close games means a lot, especially when you're in the Big Ten, you're on the road, you can pull those out. He's done a great job with those guys.
To your point, they were picked 10th in the Big Ten in the preseason writers poll, and obviously they are in the hunt for the Big Ten title. And I'm with you. I mean, to me, the hallmark of this Wisconsin program through the years, and we mentioned Bo Ryan earlier in the show, I'll mention him again, he developed players, and Greg Gard is doing the exact same thing. Players get better within their program. How about Brad Underwood, the other guy who's on that finalist list?
He's just doing a great job with just a depleted roster. He hasn't had his full roster, a healthy roster the entire season. Curbelo is expected to be not just the best point guard in the Big Ten, but he was up to be one of the better point guards in the country. So you lose your point guard to start the season, who we hear from Trent Meacham was the best player in the gym in preseason. That was a big loss for them. You lose Kofi for those few games. You lose Kofi again with the concussion. So he hasn't had his full roster and still is able to win games, go out there and compete. He's playing 4 guards. And they're competing on the glass every single night. Just that Rutgers game, they got blew away on the glass. But when you can mix up your lineups, they switched it up all year. They brought Jacob Grandison into the starting lineup. I love the way that he's challenging his guys. He calls them soft one game. They come out and win by 20 the next. Yeah. I love that ability to get the best out of your players. And then there's all those transfers. You got Grandison, you got Plummer, and Plummer may be one of the better transfers in the country to come to Illinois. So I love his ability to put all the guys together and have them work well.
Yeah, no doubt. They've used 9 different starting lineups, to your point, and it's pretty amazing to see how good they have been. I think there are a couple that weren't on that list that merit discussion. starting with Steve Peichel. I mean, these last few weeks, he's done a masterful job.
And he hasn't changed. I talked to Coach Peichel. I was calling a game against Nebraska earlier on in the Big Ten schedule. He said the same things that he's saying right now. Everyone left him dead in the water.
Yeah.
And he's got those guys to buy in, not just to the Rutgers program, but to defense. He has those guys defending at a high level. You hear him talk after the Michigan game. We weren't able to string together 3 or 4 stops in a row. And that is this Rutgers team. That's their identity. And when you can get guys that naturally want to score the basketball to believe so heavily in defense, you're going to win some games. And I just love his poise throughout. He makes a lot of jokes with the scheduling folks, but he's taken this tough part of his season, won some games, and positioned them to make the tournament.
He keeps saying this is his best team. He's been saying it all along, and I think a lot of people were scoffing at that notion a few weeks ago. They are scoffing no longer. Finally, your former coach, Matt Painter at Purdue, hard to overstate the job that he has done.
And I look at Coach Payne in the sense of the recruiting he does. And those guys that he has, I mean, Jay Ivey was barely a top 100 player. Zach Edey was ranked, I think, in the 400s.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Travion Williams wasn't ranked that high. I think Gabe Brown was a better prospect coming out of Chicago when they were in high school together. So it's a thing where those guys just grew into their roles. And he got those guys better at an exponential rate. Sasa Stefanovic become one of the better players in the Big Ten. So to be able to have guys, your guys, go get the guys you want, not worry about rankings, not worry about 3 or 4 or 5 stars, get Purdue guys and make it work. And Coach Payne has done that. And the ability to get Travion Williams, Zach Edey to buy into splitting minutes, I mean, that's been big time. It's a lot of ego there that Payne just doesn't necessarily care about, but he didn't let those guys fall into, and they're both successful. So I love the ability to grow players into the role that you know they want to be in. You can grow them to get there, but also having guys sacrifice for the greater good of the program.
I think that's the ultimate example where you have 2 all Big Ten quality players playing the same position. You don't feel comfortable having them on the court at the same time, and you get them to buy into it. It speaks volumes about the respect that his players have for him. We are 10 days away from the end of the Big Ten regular season. 4 teams still legitimately in the conference race. Wisconsin, Purdue, Illinois, all even in the loss column, with Ohio State hanging around as well. Of course, a huge game, as we mentioned, for them tonight against Illinois. How do you see this whole thing playing out?
I think Ohio State can go and get them one on the road, spoil Illinois. I think the Big Ten championship comes down to next week, Wisconsin versus Purdue. Ultimately give the edge to Purdue in a revenge game. I like Purdue's schedule to finish out. I like their ability to go on the road and get a victory. But Wisconsin is tough at home. So that's just a lot for me to say for Purdue to go in there and get a win. Wisconsin is very tough at home. But I like Purdue's schedule. I like what they have coming up, and I like how they've been defending in the last few games.
I would be surprised if we don't end up with a tie in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a 2-way tie or a 3-way tie. I mean, obviously you go to tiebreakers to come up with the top seed, but to me, it's just too closely jumbled. The schedules are too similar, but man, it's fun, isn't it? It is really fun. We will talk more about it coming up tomorrow. See you then.